Great. Okay. So, like the description of the selective says, the difference between the top speaker and the 100th speaker at a tournament is often less than 1 speaker point per debate. So we're going to discuss how to increase your speaker point so you can make your jump from that, maybe 100, 150 level up to the very top speaker points. And this is not just for vanity and getting speaker awards. Speaker points do matter for the strategic element of debate, both because they determine your seating and placement in the elimination rounds of tournaments. And so how well you speak can directly influence your elims. It can influence the prelims that you have, but also there's a kind of a community benefit that the higher speaker awards you win, the better people think you are at debate, and that can help you too. A common misconception is that judges assign speaker points based on the vibe. That is actually very wrong. And while judges may be somewhat subjective in how they assign speaker points, and may even themselves think that they're giving points based on vibes, there's absolutely a science and a mechanism to influencing how they perceive your speaking. And so that's what we're going to talk about. By the end of this lecture, actually, it'll be roughly more like 2.5 more speaker points, because we're gonna start at the bottom. So here we go. I'm going to save questions till kind of like the middle and then at the end. So if you have them, that's when I'll answer them, and then you can throw them in the chat or whatever, and I'll get to them as we go. So section 1 is about speaking techniques and mechanics, or what I like to call from a 27.5 to a 28.5. Speaking mechanics and technique are the first and largest barrier to speaker point improvement, and it can be divided into roughly 2 categories: what you do when you're saying words and what you do in between saying the words, or talking and breathing. So talking. Effective speaking in debate requires mastery of an inherently difficult skill: speaking quickly and loudly and not sounding terrible and abrasive. Instead, you want to sound like a louder, faster version of your conversational self, smooth, relaxed, and at a normal pitch and tone. This means that in your exercises, you should start slow at conversational level and ramp up, rather than trying to start talking at high speed. When I say this, I mean literally start at conversational speed and then ramp up to spreading. And this will condition your brain to understand spreading as an extension of your normal voice. The first kind of common error younger debaters or less experienced debaters make when they learn to spread is that they have heard someone spreading, an older debater or someone online, and they try to imitate that. And the problem is that what you do when you imitate spreading is you make a whole bunch of weird noises that you shouldn't be making. You make that like hum noise that happens in the background when people spread. There's like a lot of whiny noises. There's stuttering. Like when you get to the text of cards, what you hear when you hear someone else spread when you're kind of inexperienced is like, and so you're like, well, I must do that when I do cards. So like, then you all do when you're on card text. We don't want those noises. And so it's good to teach yourself that spreading is an extension of your normal talking. It is not this like noise you make that you've heard other people make. And that's very important. And I want to break this in, that the description I just gave into its like constituent parts, and we can talk about all of them. So first is volume. And the kind of like headliner item on volume is that you want a lot of it. Making sure the judge hears every word when you're speaking quickly requires you talk much louder than normal. And the reason for this is that speaking really quickly makes it a little bit difficult for you to be understood, and thus volume can help compensate for that. In spite of this, though, most debaters actually slow down when they are spreading. I'm sorry, not slow down. You don't do that. You do the opposite of that. they actually get quieter when they are spreading, especially on the text of cards and weirdly on the middle of analytic paragraphs. You do not want to do this. You always want to keep a consistent high volume while you are spreading. On top of that debaters will go quiet when they should be going louder. Judges are often sitting very far away from you in a debate classroom or auditorium back when those existed. And so being able to project your voice across a room, even though we're still on a Zoom format, is an important skill to learn, because you will debate when things are back in person again. And also on Zoom, a lot of times we're too quiet as well. And so you need to be thinking about, when you're designing the volume of your voice, to be speaking such that someone sitting far away from you can hear you, not so that your partner who's sitting right next to you can hear you. And a good way to describe this is ballroom voice, which is that you want to be speaking as if you're in a hotel ballroom. And that has like a couple benefits. One is it's psychological, like you're speaking like you're in a late elimination round of a tournament. You need to project to a large audience, into a panel of judges that may be sitting across a large room from you. And in that way, it makes you feel like you're in a very important debate. Similarly, though, that actually does have a mechanical or practical benefit, which is that it'll get you speaking louder and more fully. And that's also very important. If you find yourself in your drills talking too quiet or talking very muffled, you got to slow down until you can go your current speed at a sufficiently high volume. And that is the final kind of important thing I want to say about volume, is that a lot of times the reason why you're not very loud is actually because you're funneling a lot of the energy that you would be funneling into volume into speed. And that it's actually very difficult to talk very quickly, very loudly, because projecting at that speed requires a lot of very fine muscular control over your voice. And that's not something that just happens automatically. You can't just, you could be the fastest, clearest debater in the world, and if I told you to increase your volume, that's not going to happen just like that. It's going to strain and be difficult. And so just like you'd practice to go faster, or just like you'd practice to be more clear, you also need to practice your volume until you have a very fine control over it. One concept I want to introduce before moving on to the other aspects are that there's a third kind of, or a second kind of plane of debate or argument that happens in every round that I feel like a lot of students are not super familiar with. So the first plane or area of argument that a lot of students are familiar with is like the actual content of the arguments themselves, that there are, the things you say and the things your opponents say, and that constitutes a back and forth of the debate. We all know that. Second, you all may be a little bit more familiar with things like body language, that there's another aspect of the debate that's happening in how you posture yourself, your eye contact, how you use your hand gestures. And these are all true things too. That's why debaters will stop to pound on their table toe every now and then on a really important point, because they want to underscore that issue. Or, they want to step out from the podium for a minute. There's been some like really good debaters in previous years at the college level who've used that tactic, that whenever they want to make a really important point, they'll step away from their podium to address the judges. There's a third plane though, which is how you speak, and that volume is the first component that you can use to manipulate how judges perceive your arguments. And that if you slow down and get louder on a couple key issues of the debate consistently, you're signaling to the judge that those issues are of high importance. So for example, if you want to go for a perception-based solvency deficit to the counterplan, in the 2AC, if you're going through and then you get to the counterplan and you're like, and perception solvency deficit, the counterplan looks like legal chaos, which alienates other countries or something like that, and you did that loud and slow compared to every other solvency deficit, you're signaling that that thing is of extra importance. And if you did that consistently through the debate, it's going to increase the salience of that issue to the judge. If the other team does not spend a corresponding large amount of time or make it look like they care about that solvency deficit, if they answer it like the same, like they answered every other solvency deficit, the perception is going to be that they're actually undercovering that issue, or they don't think it's as important. And that's a way that without altering the content or without altering your body language, you can alter how the judge thinks about an argument just by playing with the volume and speed of your talking. The second aspect that I want to talk about is smoothness. You want your speaking to be a continuous, uninterrupted flow of words at roughly the same volume, pitch, tone, and speed. This means that you want to eliminate stutters as well as fillers, such as like, sort of, things like that. Put simply, you do this with practice, both with reading cards and also with speaking off the top of your head. But 9 out of 10 times of when a debater has a very non-smooth, jerky speaking style, it happens because they're trying to talk faster than they can think or read. And we know that because they don't sound bad like that all the time when they're speaking conversationally. Someone can speak to you very clearly, smoothly, persuasively at conversational speed, and then they get faster, and then all of a sudden, everything starts to fall apart. Even worse, some debaters will actually be slower when they're trying to spread versus when they're speaking conversationally. And that is because they're trying to imitate this spreading voice thing that people do, but it's a lot faster than they're able to think. And so there ends up being these really large interrupting pauses. So my advice for this is kind of twofold. First, you need to slow down until you can master your speed level. This should in general be a guiding principle for learning how to give effective, competent speeches, is that at any one, you need to master whatever speed level you're at before moving on. The second is that you need to practice thinking and reading quicker. So for reading quicker, you can do a lot of drills where you have to strain your ability to read. So reading backwards is a really good example. The backwards drill, if you're familiar with it, has you spread out loud as fast as you can, reading backwards in the card text and tags. And that'll increase your ability to quickly read information because you're doing it in a much more difficult way, kind of like running at a higher altitude, such that when you read forwards, it should be a lot easier. Speaking off the top of your head requires drills that mean you're not reading. And so in various times throughout the day, I recommend you just giving impromptu speeches on various issues, whether, when you're out walking your dog, in your head, or even, quietly so you don't look like a crazy person to your neighbors, giving a speech on, some impact calculus, doing water wars outweighs hegemony, and just trying to give a speech about that. You can also do it in, the privacy of your own home or whatever, and, not be weird. What doing that will do, though, is it will teach you to assemble arguments efficiently and quickly without having to read any material. And in debate, you actually hardly ever have to give a speech completely off the top of your head. Usually you have a few jotted notes down on a flow, a few typed words that will get you a lot more than speaking off the top of your head will. And so this is actually just a harder version of what we do in debate. If you give a speech off the top of your head, whether it's outside or at your house or whatever, and you notice that you're giving a lot of jerky, interruptive pauses, you're not able to string 10 words together without pausing to think, there's a lot of filler, you'll quickly identify that that is an area where you need improvement. And that can help diagnose a problem that you maybe were having in debate that you didn't know the cause of. And so I highly recommend this not only as a practice tool, but also as a diagnostic tool to improve your speaking. On top of jerkiness and stuttering, smoothness is also based on volume, pitch, tone, and speed being consistent throughout your speaking. And a lot of times, the problem with keeping a consistent volume or keeping a consistent speed is endurance. And that's another thing that you can directly practice in order to give better speeches. And endurance drills require doing whatever thing you're focusing on, whether it is speaking loudly or speaking quickly, for increasing amounts of time with attention paid specifically to being consistent. So what I mean by this is most endurance drills you do at the beginning should really only be 2 or 3 minutes long. And that's because a normal debate speech, 5 or 8 minutes, you're actually not very consistent. And it may feel like you are because you're giving the speech and you're focused on content or something else. But if you listen to a recording of yourself talk and try to count the words per minute you get through in the first minute and the last minute, you will be dramatically slower. And if you keep the volume on the same, you'll actually be a lot quieter by the end too. And that makes sense because speaking loudly and quickly is very energy intensive and it strains your throat. And so it takes practice to build up a lot of muscles or endurance in those areas such that you're able to keep a consistent volume and speed. So I recommend that you start with a 2 or 3 minute endurance drill and you'll be hyper attentive to making sure you're consistent. And as soon as you feel like you're starting to drop off on your speed or drop off on your volume, you should stop and recognize that that's how long you can go before starting to drop off. And over time, you can kind of set that as a benchmark and gradually improve until you're able to go a lot faster and a lot louder. One more note on smoothness is actually a little bit more technical about speaking in general, which is that there's 2 places that your body will produce volume. The first is through your mouth and through your mouth muscles and your jaw, and the other is from your diaphragm. And it's very important that you focus your speaking on your diaphragm because those muscles are a lot stronger and are able to project a lot louder and a lot faster for more periods of time. So kind of by show of virtual hands, who has heard that type of spreading, which is very wispy, quiet, and like it seems like it fades out really easily? It doesn't even have to be you, but like, you know what I'm talking about when I say that, right? Those are people who are spreading with their mouth. They're not projecting air from their diaphragm up through their chest and out of their throat. They're just like making a lot of noises with their mouth and kind of trying to make that work. It's really easy to notice when you were a judge. And even though you maybe all didn't know that's exactly what it was, you all knew exactly what I was talking about. So did judges. And that is a major, major reason why people get lower points, is that they're talking in that really kind of annoying, wispy voice rather than using the full volume. So how do you improve that? The first is I recommend doing another kind of diagnostic exercise where you place a hand on your stomach and start giving some speeches. And if you feel a lot of expansion and contraction, that means that you're using your diaphragm. But if you feel nothing and that you're kind of just, the air is coming from somewhere else, you're probably not using your diaphragm to push all of the air out of your lungs and through your throat to make full-bodied speaking. And you want to have specific emphasis. So do breathing exercises where you breathe a full chest of air in and try to push all of it out. Those exercises will teach you phrenic control or diaphragmatic control, which will hopefully translate into your speaking in debates because you'll be a little bit more able to control where the air from your voice comes from. This is another area where listening to a recording of yourself talk will be very important because you'll quickly be able to see if your speaking is full-bodied or if it's kind of airy and vacuous. Okay, that's smoothness. The next is smoothness of, or that was, smoothness of volume and speed. The next is smoothness of pitch and tone. Pitch and tone are like music / speaking terms that I don't know the precise definition of, but I know what they mean generally, which is that the highness or lowness of your voice should be consistent between your conversational and your spreading voice. You don't want to rapidly change the pitch and tone of your speaking between conversational and spreading voice. And you all know what I mean by this, because someone will be speaking and be like, are you ready for the order? Da, 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 da. And then they start spreading and it sounds like a completely different person is talking. And it's really jarring and it's like usually pretty annoying to listen to. and you don't want to do that. This does not mean that any type of pitch or tone or any type of highness or lowness in anyone's voice makes for a bad spreader. It's actually the opposite, that most people sound good when they're spreading as long as they sound like themselves. And so you always want to try to keep consistent. This is another place where starting slow and ramping up will teach your brain that conversational and spreading are very similar speaking styles, and thus you won't try to imitate someone else. If you listen to a person with a higher voice than you spreading, and then you try to imitate them, you're going to change the pitch of your voice in such a way that, one, it strains you, because talking in a different pitch is going to strain your vocal cords, and it's going to decrease your endurance. It's going to make you slower. It's going to make you stutter because you're diverting a bunch of mental energy into trying to change the pitch of your voice. But it's also going to sound really jarring to the judge and lower your points. Okay, so that's all smoothness. The next aspect of the mechanics of speaking is enunciation. And it is incredibly important for getting high speaker points that you enunciate your words. You do not want to mumble syllables when you're giving a speech, but instead want to be very clear on differentiating words. The best way to describe this is that you want the differences between syllables and the differences between words and those transitions to be sharp, such that words do not start to blend together. One, this is going to make you sound more clear at higher speeds. And two, it's going to make it so you don't accidentally skip cards or skip words or skip parts of words, which could even potentially be construed as clipping if you're really, really mumbly. If you've ever listened to someone spreading and they're spreading exceptionally fast but still clear, can anyone think of a person who does that in their head where it's like really, really quick, yet you feel like you can hear every word anyway? That is enunciation happening. And that's because at high speeds like that, you really shouldn't be able to hear all the words that they're saying. But the reason you can is because they're sharply differentiating between each word. And remember earlier when I was talking about smoothness and I was talking about you're using your diaphragm to generate a lot of energy in your speech. For enunciation, it's actually the opposite. You get enunciation from your mouth. And that's because you can use your teeth and your jaw muscles to quickly differentiate between words by rapidly changing how much the size of your mouth. And that's where enunciation comes from. And if you look at videos online or videos of good debaters who you think are clear and you watch their mouth, you will notice that their mouth moves a lot. Versus people who are very mumbly and very unclear, their mouth is going to stay small most of the time because they're not rapidly differentiating between consonants. The way that you practice this is by doing over-enunciation drills. And I say over-enunciation because you should enunciate every word more than you normally would, such that you're like obnoxiously saying every syllable. So instead of the first sentence that I said on smoothness was you want your speaking to be a continuous, uninterrupted flow of words. At that conversational speed, you could probably hear what I said with me enunciating at that level. But I'm going to enunciate it more so that you get the point of what you want to be doing in a drill. It should be more like, you want your speaking to be a continuous, etc. That's an over-enunciation drill. If it makes you feel stupid, then it's working. And the reason is that at higher speeds, you have much less control over the enunciation and distinctions between words and syllables than you do at conversational speed. So building up the skills to over-enunciate will translate to roughly normal enunciation when you're going much quicker. Similarly, if you do nothing and you enunciate normally, that's going to translate into mumbling at higher speeds, which is not effective for reading text, reading cards, reading tags, whatever. So the name of the game on enunciation is highlighting the differences between words with sharp breaks in enunciation. I would do a warm-up every morning before I would give speeches at debate tournaments. And I'm sure that like my hotel neighbors hated it and the rest of the debate team hated it. And is that I would over-enunciate and count to 30 because you want 30 speaker points, and count then backwards from 30. So 1, 2, 3, and I would enunciate those numbers as loudly and as obnoxiously as I could. Like like the most annoying way to say the number 7, I would say every morning. Like what is literally the worst way you can imagine someone saying that at the highest possible volume. And you do that all the way to 30 and then all the way back. Then I would do all the letters. And then I would do all the numbers and then all the way numbers back. So that's 60 numbers plus 60 numbers is 120 numbers plus 26. So there'd be 146 things I would say before I even get to spreading. That's how important enunciation is. It is basically what separates bad spreaders from good spreaders. Like there's other things, volume, smoothness. I'm going to talk about breathing in a second, speed, whatever. But really it's enunciation. And if you put more emphasis into making your enunciation good, it'll reap massive, massive benefits. On the side, it'll also make you faster. And I'm not entirely sure actually why this is true, but the better you are at enunciating and separating your words, the easier you will find it to spread. And my theory on this is that when you're first learning to spread and your mouth gets all full of spit and it's gross, I think that comes from the fact that most people mumble when they talk. And if you're very good at moving your mouth and enunciating sharply between words, you're going to find that problem comes up less. So there's an added benefit. Last element of talking before I go on to breathing is eye scanning. Eye scanning is a really underrated way to get better at spreading. And the reason is that, I want to illustrate another with a little like informal poll. Who, when they're hearing someone spread, kind of hears that like weird pause that happens after every 10 words? Or even not a pause, they'll like drag a word out. You want a lot of it, making sure each judge hears every word when you're speaking. Yeah, very requires you talk louder than normal. So there's actually, so anyone hear any of that? That is an eye scanning error. And the reason is that their doc is really wide. Luckily, the best thing about eye scanning errors is that of all of the mistakes you can make in debate, across speaking, across learning, cutting cards, across giving speeches, this is the thing that is the easiest to fix. And the reason it is the easiest to fix is that you should just make your doc narrow. If you make your Word document really narrow, your eye has to scan less. Instead of moving across the whole 13 inches of your computer screen or whatever to get to the next line, you're moving across 5 inches. It'll make your eye scan much faster. Everyone talks a lot about read mode in debate, that like thing where there's two things next to each other and it's really zoomed in. Everyone's like, oh, read mode is awesome because like I don't have to scroll, I just hit the arrows. It's not making people faster because they don't have to scroll their mouse. That's dumb. The reason it's making them faster is because it's making their doc narrower and they didn't even think about it. And that the narrower your document is, the less your eye has to scan. And thus you're going to have those less drawn out, ugly things every 10 words. Like it's jarring to listen to as a judge and it's instantly easy to fix as a debater. So narrow your doc, stop your stuttering. Probably 0.1 to 0.2 speaker points, literally for free right there. Okay, that's what you do when you're saying the words. What you do in between the words or breathing should be hard to notice as possible. And what I mean by that is the judge should not know that you are a breathing, living person. Like it should seem like when you're giving a speech that you just do not require oxygen. Your breath should be concealed and at places that are very opportune. So what does this mean you should not do? This means you should not be breathing in the middle of sentences. You don't want to be reading a tag and breathe right in the middle of a tag. No, econ, decline. That, like, the worst. Don't do that. And horrible. Instead, you want to breathe in places where there's already naturally pauses. And I'm going to introduce a concept in the second section of this called judge pen time. And if you've had me in lab before, I rant about this a lot. But it's the concept that judges spend a lot of time, the amount of time that it takes for judges to write something down is longer than it takes for you to say it. And that's obvious because you're spreading in their writing. And we'll talk about that more in a second, but just know that you want to make your breaths at times that extend judge pen time. So places that like right after an author is a really good breathing time. And the reason that's true is that that gives the judge just a couple extra nanoseconds to get down the end of a tag in an author or a date. So if you're saying no econ decline, clearly 15, the judge has a little bit more time to just get that down before you go into the card, and they're not going to notice that breath. Because what they're doing right then is they're not listening to you, they're focusing on writing something down. Whereas if you did it in the middle of a tag, they're listening to that tag. And a breath right then will interrupt their thought process, and then they're going to start focusing on it. You never want the judge to focus on your breathing, because then, one, they're not focusing on your content, and that's going to hurt you argumentatively. But also, breathing is just an ugly noise. There's no person who breathes nicely. It's like, it makes you sound like a machine. And so if the judge is focusing on your breathing, it's just going to make you sound worse, because they're listening to like this biological organism do breathing noises. It's just ugly to listen to. And that's going to lower your speaker points. So breathe at times that are opportune. My favorite is after an author name, but there's other times in between analytics. Take a breath between perm to both and perm to the counterplane. God knows your judge needs it to finish that first perm anyway. And so take an opportune breath there. Don't do perm to the counterplane, because that's like, there's no reason to be suspenseful with your analytic and make them wait to figure out what perm it is till after your breath concludes. And it's just going to interrupt their thought process. If you are breathing in the middle of cards, breathe after sentences, ideally between warrants. That's very hard. And so, sometimes that's more trouble than it's worth. But after sentences, between paragraphs, between the end of a card and the tag of a new card, very good. How many of you have gotten at some point in your debate career the comment that sounded like your cards and tags blended together? Or it was hard for me to tell when a card stopped and the tag started? Big time judge comment. If you want to fix that and don't want to fix your clarity because you're stubborn, fine, I guess whatever. Just take a breath between the end of your card and the next tag. It's like a nice little cheat code way to signal that you're moving on. Yeah, very good. Or just say and be a grown-up. Okay, so that is breathing. Section 2 is content, or the what you say, not how you say it. I've also called this section from a 28.5 to a 29.5. And the reason why is that everything I just said, if you did it, you'd get a 28.5. I mean, honestly, in 2020, you'd get a 28.5 for showing up. But like, ideally, there'd be some reason why doing the things I just said mattered for your speaker points. And so they will improve you. They're going to get you out of that like 100 speaker award territory into like 30s, 40s, 50s. Really, just by like speaking like a real person, like who just happens to be talking faster. Okay, content, what you say. I'm going to have to ironically be a little quick because I wrote a lot of stuff down here. First aspect of content that is important is organization. It's important. You want speech structure that makes sense. Make your judge's job as easy as possible when evaluating the debate and put things where they belong. This requires a discussion of, and I foreshadowed this earlier, judge pen time, which is the time judges spend writing down something you say. It is longer than you think. Now, stop. I just said it's longer than you think. Think about how long you think it is now. You're like, okay, fine. Judges do take longer to write stuff down. Okay, it's longer than that. Like, however long you think it takes to write down an argument, now that I've told you it takes too long, is actually longer than you're now thinking. It takes a lot of time to write. Like, compared to the 350 words per minute that we talk in debate, can you imagine writing 350 words per minute? Can you imagine typing 350 words per minute? There's no way. And so it is a much slower exercise to write than it is to speak, which means judges not only take more time to write, but they write down far less information than you give them, which means we need to optimize how we speak so that the information they write down is the information that is most important to us winning. There are 3 big ways I have to make that work. The first one is a thing you should know, which is line by line. This is the reason we do line by line. And going in order. You answer the arguments in the order that they were made. This means judges are spending less time scanning their flow to find what you are talking about and the issue that you're spending your time on, and more time writing down your arguments. You ever seen in person when you're giving a speech and you start a new argument, and the judge looks like they just had an aneurysm as they like flip over a piece of paper all mad. Like it looks kind of something like this. Like you're like, and no impact to econ decline. And the judge is like, and they start writing it. That's them signaling to you that you're going out of order. And like sometimes it needs to happen. Like you're a 1A and like you don't have time to answer all the args on the DA, and you're just gonna make them flip that paper, and that's what happens. But like if you can avoid that paper flip, that's like 4 more words the judge writes down. And 4 words might not sound like a lot in speaking, but 4 words is a full argument in writing. Like no exclamation point econ dash Clary is a full argument that the judge could have wrote in the time it took them to flip a piece of paper over. And so that time does matter. And that's not even considering or counting the time it takes to scan the flow to see where you are, or flip through an Excel tab to get to the place where you're talking about. Or, you know, a lot of judges, when they flow on their computer, will like copy and paste your stuff to reconstruct your speech for you. If I'm judging, I will never do that, by the way. But the time it takes for them to do that will also take time. And so you want to minimize that. If we all talked conversationally or conversational speed, this would matter less, since they would have more time to find arguments location, and, you know, scanning wouldn't matter as much. And so the quicker you get and the faster the debate that you are in, the more you will need to rely on line-by-line debating. It will become essential. If you want to be fast, you cannot be unorganized. It's just, it will not work. Because if you are quick and messy, the judge is going to have no time to write down the arguments that you're making, because they're going to be too busy chasing you around the flow, such that they're only going to write down a few arguments that you make. If you have a choice between being, well, okay, if you can't fix your organization, you need to slow down. Similarly, you can't speed up until you have worked on your organization as well. Second aspect of organization that you may not have heard before, which is also really important, is argument first extensions, or AFEs. A common mistake debaters make is extending an argument by doing something like the following. Our Smith evidence says econ decline doesn't cause war. Bad. Judges can only write down so many words per sentence. And if you said the thing I just said, the judge is going to write down something like Smith ev econ before you get to the next thing. And then they're going to start writing down whatever your next argument was, instead of writing down the warrants for your argument. Instead, you should have extended it something like econ decline doesn't cause war, you know, insert warrants, that's Smith. This is better for 2 reasons. Reason number 1 is that judges write down your main argument, even if they didn't catch the author. And that means that even if, you know, they didn't write down that it was Smith or didn't know this card was from Smith, they know you said it. They know you made an argument that was impact defense to the economy, and they can get the evidence after the debate. Debate is ultimately a game of arguments. It is not a game of cards. Cards only exist to support our arguments. So if the judge knows you made a bunch of cards, but they don't know what any of the arguments are, they're not going to reconstruct that for you. Number 2, that was also good because it did not use the phrase evidence, which is a dead word that you don't want anyone writing down, since it serves no argumentative purpose. There are a lot of dead words in debate, and ironically, the deadest of them all is the word debate. Who's heard something along the lines of, now on to the link debate? I'm not even going to ask you to raise your hands because you've all heard it. Now on to the link debate is actually the worst phrase in debate, because every single piece of it is unnecessary. The phrase now is unnecessary because everyone knows that it is now. On to the link debate is unnecessary because if you started talking about the link, everyone would know you were moving. If you're saying it's the link debate and then extending the link is unnecessary because if you're extending a link, everyone knows it's a link. And saying it's a debate is perhaps the worst of all because everyone knows a debate is occurring. And therefore, now on to the link debate is entirely useless. That's not related to argument first extensions, but it's a rant that I have to include because it's just horrible. But yeah, argument first extensions. The only way you should ever reference an author name is with the word that's in front of it. Okay? Always think that. Instead of our blank evidence says, say an argument, throw in that's. I'd say that's worth 2 speaker points probably by itself, just for what it's worth. If you did that a whole debate. Okay. third aspect of organization is numbering and internal structure. You should use it. Numbering helps keep the judge's flow organized, which improves their pen time, and also makes it more daunting for your opponents, as it becomes very obvious when they drop a number. So, you know, if you're like, they say perm do both, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And the app is like, perm do both shields linked to the net benefit. Number 7 is wrong. Next argument. Like, there should be alarm bells going off in everyone's mind that they just dropped 9 arguments. And if you had not numbered, it would become less clear that they had just dropped 9 arguments. But numbering, not only does it help you improve your speaker points, but it also demonstrates when your opponent is missing something. However, there are 2 common and major mistakes that are made when it comes to numbering. The first mistake is numbering inefficiently. Phrases like subpoint A or A subpoint are 2 syllables too long because subpoint is useless. If you start numbering with 1 or A, it's clear that that is a subpoint because it is a subpoint. It's a bullet. You don't have to call it a subpoint. That's like being like bullet point A. It makes no sense. And so get rid of subpoint. Over the course of a speech, this could cost you a card or more in wasted syllables. I have heard someone say like subpoint 20 plus times in a speech. That's 40 syllables. That's a short card or a theory argument. That's another permutation or 2 permutations. Also, subpoint, like the word evidence, kind of like I already illustrated, is a wasted word that you do not want anyone writing down. Second major problem that comes from numbering is over-numbering. There's nothing worse than a 2AC who gets to the case and just spews random numbers all over, kind of something like 1 and C number 1 is wrong, cross by 2AC number 4 from advantage 1, also takes out 1 and C4, group 1 and C2 and 3, they don't answer scenario 2, that takes out 1 and C number 5. That is like impossible robot talk to flow. Like, I promise no one will ever flow that. And the problem is that a lot of debaters don't get like feedback on that because compared to other errors that happen in debate, it's sometimes kind of minor. And since it happens usually in the 2AC, by the time the 2AR happens, the judge is not thinking about giving comments, but it is an egregious error. And a 2NC, if you're a neg and someone does that in the 2AC, the block needs to call that out and be like, okay, the 2AC on this issue was a bunch of calculator nonsense. No arguments got extended. All of this is at 0. 1AR does not get to reinvent it. I shouldn't have to have an abacus to flow the 2AC. I'm extending all of our 1 and C arguments with words, which is how you should do it. That is how the block should respond to that. The 2AC should not make arguments that are basically just numbers. Numbers are there to help extend arguments. Debate is first and foremost a game of arguments, and numbers exist for structure. They are not replacements for arguments. That is just so important. That's especially impossible to deal with when a judge is seeing your act for the first time. If you want to show off and show like how good you know the numbers of your 1AC, do that for your coach or your parents or something. Don't like try to impress a judge by telling them how well you know the structure of your 1AC. They probably never heard it before. Like, spoiler alert, when you say scenario 1 in the 1AC, like 75% of judges are not even going to separate your advantage by scenarios anyway. So it's not going to help you a ton. But it does help you for reinforcing the line by line. If you said 1 and C1, yes, econ decline causes war. It's very easy for the judge to know what you're doing and what argument you're extending. And so it'll help keep everything even. Thing I'm going to add to numbering and internal structure is what I call bumper sticker words, which are just buzzword phrases that are kind of like numbers, but they're a little bit argumentative. So like, if you say you're answering a permutation and you have numbers to make your permutation answers, you can also add buzzwords to make it clear what the argument is. So you can be like, 1, overlap. And then you can explain why overlap is bad for your net benefit. And that way, the judge is going to attach that warrant, that full argument to the word overlap. So in the 2 and R, you can be like, 1, overlapped, dropped, and then you can explain it quickly. And since you've used the word overlap a bunch, it actually will save you time because the judge knows what you're talking about. And so using bumper stickers like that also keeps you organized and also saves you time. Okay. The second aspect of content that will help improve your speaker points is judge instruction. Anytime I give a debater above a 29, it is almost always for judge instruction. Just like you want to make your judge's life easier with organization, you similarly want to make their life easier evaluating the debate. This means giving specific, direct instructions for how to evaluate various pieces of the debate such that it becomes easier to vote for you. I have kind of 5 big tips on judge instructions. 1, you should never, or you should only ever refer to the judge in the second person, i.e. all the you words. So like you should, you, that's the judge. And you should only ever refer to your opponent in the third person, i.e. they. You should never call your opponent you. And the reason is that it's going to make the judge confused about who you're talking about. It also usually makes you petty. If you're like, you dropped, it just sounds so rude. So just yous are reserved for the judge. Theys are reserved for the opponent. And this has an added benefit though, because not only will it avoid confusion, but now anytime you use a second person phrase, the judge knows that it is an instruction directly to them. So if you're like, you should ignore blank, you should ignore any evidence from before 2018 because new law got passed. That is the judge. You are specifically communicating to the judge how they should think about the document of cards that happens after the debate. It has a warrant and it will apply to the whole debate, all the evidence on that specific issue. And they know that you're talking to them. It's also, by the way, judge instruction as a judge psychologically is way harder to ignore than normal arguments. If in a post round, if a kid is like, yeah, but like their evidence is all from 2018, why does that matter? And the judge is like, well, I think it still matters. Versus when a post round is like, I gave you specific instructions to ignore this evidence and they didn't answer it. That's a much more daunting post round question the judge has to deal with. And it's going to force them to take you more seriously. Second, you need to have some judge eagle-eyed perspective on the debate. Try to step out of your position as a debater and see the tough areas of the debate to resolve and provide some guidance on how to handle them. A lot of times you're going to get advice to zoom out and try to see the strategic aspects of the debate. Where do you need to win? That is very important. I'm talking about something else, which is that I want you to zoom out and see which areas of the debate are hard to judge. Sometimes you can zoom out, see something that's you need to win, but it's easy and it's not going to be a large issue for the debate. However, there are some places where an issue is going to be really tricky. A good example of that is like if you're straight turning an advantage and they read an econ advantage and you're reading an econ DA on the case. You should zoom out and see that the internal link to the econ advantage versus the link to the econ DA is going to be a very tough issue of the debate to resolve because both sides are going to have a lot of evidence both ways, and you're going to have to sift through that. Instead of just mindlessly extending all of your evidence, you should give the judge specific instructions on how to handle it. So you should be like, instead of, extend 1 and C number 1, bond, link, whatever, which you can do whatever. You also want to give them specific instructions. Just be like, you should only consider bond links to the AF, or you should only consider the bond market when deciding, whether the AF hurts or helps the economy. And that way you're making a framing issue about one specific link such that when the judge is deciding all of the nitty gritty of that area, if they see a bunch of bond links from your side and they don't see an AF response, they're going to just say that matters more. Another way is that let's say that there's a big straight turn on the econ DA happening, or on the econ advantage, but you also have another DA somewhere else in the debate. Instead of just extending both, give the judge specific instructions. Be like, this econ DA is going to be a giant thorny mess, and like one side might win 51% and the other side might win 49%. But this other DA we have going on over here is a giant one-way offense for the negative. The AF has no link turn, which means there's only a risk of offense on this other DA. So it is a tiebreaker, even if this econ advantage gets messy, right? You're giving the judge a specific instruction on how to evaluate all of the pieces on the debate, and you're doing so by anticipating what will be difficult about their job. Third, treat judge instruction like an argument. We gave an explicit instruction in the 2NC to discredit any solvency deficit without a specific impact attached to it, and they dropped it. That means you should not consider any deficits the 1AR made. You're treating judge instruction that you made earlier in the debate as something the AF can drop, which they can. And if you treat it like an argument, then you can establish a monopoly on judge instruction by the end of the debate, which will increase, again, your speaker points and also your ability to control how the debate gets resolved. Fourth, signal to the judge that an argument is important with repeated key phrases. And this is kind of like the bumper sticker thing I said earlier. Does one of your 1AC cards say something like, can't put the cart before the horse, as a counterpoint answer? Use that phrase for all it's worth. We used to put idioms in our 1AC cards, like 50 font, and they would make it into tags, and we would try to use them on 1AC and 2AC cross-X. We would put it into the 2AC and the 1AR and the 2AR. The phrase put the cart before the horse should be like in the 1AC tag. In a cross-X, they'll be like, how do you solve? And before you even get to how you solve, you should be like, well, that's the person I'm talking to in this scenario. You can't put the cart before the horse. And then you say your argument. And the reason you do that is because you are pounding into the judge's brain that you want them to know that phrase. So that when they pull up the card doc at the end of the debate and they see the author saying the phrase, can't put the cart before the horse, they're going to be like, oh my God, that's what they were talking about this whole time. They've been referencing this specific language of this card. And that solvency deficit might literally not even exist. Like the author might have just thrown that stupid phrase out for no reason, but because you've just been pounding it into their brain, it's going to feel so much more real than it should have been. Again, not only good speaker points, but also really good way to make a mountain out of a molehill, which is what you got to do sometimes when you need to impact solvency deficits. Judges pay attention to eye-grabby repeated phrases. Now, does that mean that I want you to be like some robot that spits the same 14 words out every speech? No, you need to be conservative about how you use this. Don't use it over and over and over and over again, but a few key phrases throughout the debate are really important. Finally, and my favorite trick, like of all time favorite debate trick, and like one of the slyest things you can do, cross-X, give a final rebuttal. This is my absolute favorite trick, is that when you're asked questions in cross-X, you should immediately begin giving a final rebuttal. And that is especially true in 1AC and 1AC cross-X and in 1NC cross-X. And the reason why is that when you start giving your final rebuttal, they're like, oh, so how do you solve the economy if there's the coronavirus? And you're like, the AF overcomes coronavirus's impact to the economy. One, coronavirus is temporary, but the AF is key to recovery because the manufacturing sector is the key base of the economy. Two, economic stimulus buffers the effect of coronavirus, but it can't buffer the effect of a protracted lull in manufacturing. Three, our evidence takes all of this stuff into account and says that this is the only way to resolve a pandemic. Four, the pandemic is only a demand shock. The AF solves a supply shock because of the manufacturing sector, which means that we overcome it. If you start doing that in cross-X, and then in the 2AR, when you get to that line in the case debate, and you're like, only the AF solves coronavirus recovery. One, coronavirus is temporary, the AF is not, and you give the exact same speech, it is going to make it look like the neg has been missing the boat the entire time because you've been giving a consistent argumentative narrative throughout the entire debate. In cross-X, you shouldn't just be trying to survive answer to answer by hoping on a prayer that they ask you something easy. You should be giving argumentative speeches in cross-X and previewing or foreshadowing. When you're reading, like the same is the fact when you're like reading a book or watching a movie and like something happens at the beginning of the movie, like, you know, in Inception where they're like in that guy's house and at the end in the house again, and you're like, oh man, like that, I knew that was coming, or like that was foreshadowing, that was so cool. Like we like foreshadowing. It's like a very intuitively appealing thing to our brains. And if you do it in a debate and a judge is like, oh my God, they knew this was coming. They like totally anticipated the neg. They built their whole argument around that. It's going to make you seem like way smarter and really competent. Even if you don't get this benefit, you still gave a really good cross-X answer because you gave it in a rebuttal style, and that's still good. I said there was 5 tips to judge instruction, but there's actually 6 because I forgot one. The other one is in your final rebuttals, narrate the debate. Another one of my favorite tricks is you should give a history of the debate in your final rebuttal. We have been saying that coronavirus is a demand shock the entire debate and that the AF's supply shock outweighs, and they have dropped it in every speech. Only supply shocks matter. We have read new evidence. Their evidence does not assume any of it. We said that in 1AC cross-ex. The block ignored it. We specifically said it on this advantage in the 1AR. The 2NR missed it, and I'm saying it for a third time now. That type of narrated history of the debate forces the judge to consider your argument and attaches an extra punitive cost to drops by your opponent. And that only makes it look like you are the authority on the debate, which will increase your speaker points because it looks like you are the one that has known the entire time what is going on, but it'll also punish your opponents. One reason why really good 2ARs kind of get the reputation for being these like putting the pieces back together, crafty speeches is that they do this, and that they narrate the history of the debate, and they strategically placed things throughout the debate to make this better. So buzzwords, you use buzzwords so that you can do this. We have been saying you can't put the cart before the horse in 1AC evidence. It was in a tag. I mentioned it in cross-ex. The 1NC didn't answer it. We said it again in the 2AC. The block had another opportunity to answer the case, and they failed. The 1AR extended it again, and the 2NR, for some unknown reason, dropped it for a third time. You cannot put the cart before the horse in the 2AR is a much more powerful 2AR than just saying it again. Narrate the history of the debate. An extra bonus for this is to do this with buzzwords that are in the judge's judge philosophy. Judges' judge philosophies are like useful, I guess, because they tell you how they judge the debate, but like usually by the time you're reading their judge philosophy, you're stuck with them, so who cares? But if they use phrases in their judge philosophy, copy them. So if they're explaining topicality and they say something like, I feel like most topicality is just wordplay. You should use the phrase wordplay in your speech. You should be like, this topicality definition is opportunistic wordplay. Put that in the 2AC, put it in the 1AR, and what am I going to say about the 2AR? We have been saying this entire debate that this topicality argument is opportunistic wordplay. I said that in the 2AC. The block didn't answer it. We extended it in the 1AR. The 2NR dropped it again, and I'm saying it again now. It's opportunistic wordplay that is arbitrary. It shifts the goalpost, and it means that the negative will always find a reason to exclude the app, which ruins debate and crowds out substance, which is the only impact to debate. If you did that, and that word was in the judge's judge philosophy, what are they going to do? Look at you and be like, I don't care that it's wordplay. I don't care about that. Of course they're not going to give that decision because they've already committed to voting for you. Like, the judge philosophies should not be considered guides to how judges think. They should be considered written contracts where the judge has promised to vote for you if you do certain things. And this is a great way to force their hand by using their own words against them. Finally, last thing I want to say really fast is that the last 0.5 speaker points, that 29.5 to the 30, comes from developing a personality. Likeable people get more speaker points. People that judges like get better points. And you should cultivate a personality that people want to give high speaker points to by being friendly or, by being playfully aggressive, or however your personality ends up being. You should make it so people want to give speaker points to you instead of being withdrawn, boring, uninterested, because that really is where the last few points come from. I had like a little bit more of a spiel on that, but we don't have a ton of time. Technically, the elective is over, but I will take questions for a few minutes should you have them.
Miles, I have a question. So when you were talking about the AFEs and that sort, in my opinion, from what I've seen, I've heard that it's sounded almost like robot-ish. That's to do the same structure 3 different times per flow. I guess how do you not overcome that issue?
So it's not, well, okay. 1, if it's robotic, that's fine. 2, you shouldn't be less efficient for flair. It's not worth losing speech time and efficiency and judge pen time just to be interesting. If you're being a robot, that means that the judge is hyper-focused only on the content of what you are saying and not on how you are saying it, which will increase your speaker points. I also don't think that is going to be that robotic, just because you'll have so many other things going on in the speech that just saying that and then an author name is not going to stand out as repetition.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, well, no one has any questions, which is fine because we went completely over time. So thank you all for being a good audience and coming to the elective. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your camp.
Thank you, Miles.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.